This startling story begins with Mike, an author who did not believe in ghosts or gods. It was a time when everyone doubted whether these things were real, but Mike had a keen interest in researching paranormal activities and had written about them in his books. This made Mike's books quite famous, and he became popular. However, Mike had yet to experience anything that would make him believe in ghosts or gods. A few years ago, Mike's daughter had died for unknown reasons, which shook him deeply and left him quite disturbed. In his distress, he even divorced his wife, and since then, Mike has lived alone, exploring these phenomena. His work became traveling to various places to research paranormal activities and documenting them in his books, which people enjoyed. These pursuits had made Mike quite wealthy, but his main goal was to actually witness a paranormal event so he could connect with the spirit world and communicate with his deceased daughter. Although he had not yet had any such experience, he was determined to try. Mike only trusted what he had seen with his own eyes, and whether gods or ghosts existed, he would find out eventually. Now, Mike went to a hotel named Dolphin for his new research. This hotel, with 14 floors, was quite luxurious. Mike went to his room, unpacked his belongings, and then went out to surf on the beach. While he was surfing, there was a moment when Mike began to sink completely into the water, and he had his first near-death experience. He felt he might actually die, but the waves quickly brought him back to the shore, allowing him to regain consciousness shortly after. Upon returning to his hotel, Mike read some news about the Dolphin Hotel, which clearly stated that one should never go to room 1408 because anyone who had entered that room had never returned alive. It was believed that paranormal activities occurred within that room, and there are many malevolent spirits residing there. All these things excited Mike greatly. He was determined to see paranormal activities by any means. He approached the receptionist to request a room change, but Mike had already booked room 1408. When Lynn, a manager, found out, he spoke to Mike before giving him the room. Lynn informed Mike that anyone who had stayed in that room had never returned alive. Some had committed suicide, while many others had simply vanished. But Mike was adamant about seeing the room because he wanted to verify the reality of paranormal activities with his own eyes. Lynn could not refuse due to Mike's insistence and gave him a final warning, saying that no one had stayed in that room for more than an hour. Despite the warning, Mike confidently asked for the key. Lynn handed him the key, and Mike went directly to room 1408. Standing in front of room 1408, Mike unlocked it with the key. He stepped inside slowly, and the room was completely dark. However, Mike did not feel any fear yet as he had not seen any ghosts or spirits. He quickly turned on the lights, illuminating the room. Suddenly, the door of the room closed by itself, and no matter how much Mike tried, it wouldn't open. He stopped trying to open the door and moved further inside the room, unaware that he had made a grave mistake by entering. As he went deeper into the room, he began to experience disturbing visions and found many bloodstains. There were also dead bodies scattered around. When rescuers learned about this, they too were afraid to enter the room. Mike was at a loss about what to do next as all the doors were now closed. How would he get out of this room? It turns out that this entire story is based on a book called The Divine Comedy. In fact, it describes how if a person dies, they must journey from hell to heaven. Along the way, they must face layers of their past deeds, both good and bad, while passing through the 9 circles of death. Only after completing all these stages will they finally reach heaven. For Mike, the terrifying experiences begin to unfold in a similar fashion. The real truth was that when Mike was surfing, he had drowned and died at that moment, entering the stages of hell. What was happening to him now was part of the process of passing through the 9 circles of hell. Mike was probably facing the first phase of this process. Mike, who was trapped in the room, tried to call out to a lady from the adjacent room. He kept hearing her voice, so he shouted loudly, but the lady did not respond. Then Mike cautiously opened the window of his room and stepped outside, moving away. Being on the top floor, the winds were very strong. Mike advanced slowly, as any mistake could lead him to fall to his death. The pressure from the wind increased so much that Mike could hardly move. Suddenly, he saw the same lady through the other window. She was a large woman with a completely transparent body. Mike realized she was a type of spirit trying to mislead him. For the first time, Mike saw a spirit and was very shocked. Although he had written about many spirits and ghosts in his books, he had never seen anything like this. But today, he had encountered a very dangerous spirit. In the next moment, the spirit jumped out of the window and disappeared instantly. Now, the window that Mike was holding onto began to slowly close. Mike quickly made his way back into the room through the window, barely. If Mike had stayed there before the window closed, all his paths to escape the room would have been blocked, and he might have failed at the very first phase of hell, leading to his soul being trapped there forever. Mike was unable to understand anything at this point, but the reality was that he was completely trapped. We learn a bit more about Mike here, how greedy he is and how he only thinks about himself. When Mike's daughter died for some reason, he left his wife alone, even though she needed him at that time. Mike did not go to her side. He maintained a relationship with his father solely to inherit all his properties. Essentially, he wanted to take over all the property after his father's death. Mike was also highly alcoholic, with a terrible habit of drinking. He spent all his money on drinks and did not contribute anything to his household expenses. All this greed and selfishness were aspects of Mike's character that are highlighted here. Consequently, Mike was destined to face punishment. Mike continued his journey and arrived in a room where he noticed water spread across the floor. He also saw a photo frame of a boat that appeared to be moving in reality. Mike couldn't understand how a photo frame could be so realistic. Driven by curiosity, he moved closer to examine the photo. The temperature in the room had dropped significantly. Suddenly, the photo frame shattered completely, and water started pouring out from inside it. The entire room filled with water, and Mike began to drown. He struggled desperately to save himself and stay above the water. What Mike was experiencing now was a reflection of his past actions and the greed he had indulged in. In his frustration, Mike called the receptionist, demanding to be rescued, but unfortunately, the room's phone line was never connected. Mike, who had never believed in such things before, now started to realize that these phenomena were real. He began to scream hysterically, desperate to escape from the room. For Mike, all escape routes were closed. He was also quite angry at this point. When Mike got angry, he would either hurt those around him or harm himself. Furthermore, Mike had lost his faith in God. He thought that God did not exist. These thoughts began after Mike lost his daughter. Before that, he had revered and prayed to God, but the mysterious death of his daughter shattered his faith. He even began to hate God and believed that God did not exist. His actions and thoughts led to him facing punishment in the next phase. Suddenly, the temperature in the room rose so high that everything inside started melting, indicating that the heat was even more intense than a desert. Mike slowly began to realize this, and it became unbearably hot. The extreme heat made Mike suffer to the point where his mind was not functioning properly. It felt like he might die, but he endured it up to a certain limit. Eventually, the temperature in the room returned to normal, meaning Mike had completed this phase of hell. It was revealed that Mike was a big fraud. Although he had never deceived anyone directly, he did not follow or believe in the things he wrote about in his books. In a way, he was misleading his entire audience into believing in things he had never personally witnessed. Despite this, he made money from these stories and created them to mislead people. All his novels and stories were false, but Mike portrayed paranormal events so convincingly that the audience believed they were real. This made Mike quite popular, but now his popularity would not help him. He was bound to face punishment. Suddenly, Mike noticed an unknown man attacking him with a sword and other weapons. Mike was continuously dodging the attacks from the masked man, who seemed to teleport from one place to another in an instant. Although Mike kept running, the mysterious spirit tortured him severely, leaving deep marks on his body with the weapon. The moment Mike glanced around, the spirit vanished. He had never experienced such pain and fear before, but he was beginning to believe that the paranormal activities he had written about in his books were indeed real, as he had witnessed them with his own eyes. Worse things were yet to come for Mike. He had betrayed his wife after his daughter's death. Despite his wife's wish for him to stay with her in such a critical condition, Mike had selfishly left her alone. His wife had always wanted him by her side during those hard times, but Mike had only thought about himself and moved away. Because of this betrayal, the room's temperature began to plummet, and everything was soon covered in ice. Mike felt so cold that he could barely control himself and ended up lying on the floor with a blanket. His entire body became numb, and he could no longer move. These harsh conditions were a direct consequence of his betrayal. If Mike had acted differently, he wouldn't have to face this situation. Mike became completely unconscious in the extreme cold and was covered by ice, with no one to save him. As this phase concluded, the room's temperature eventually returned to normal. However, Mike had to face a new phase where he had to renounce all worldly attachments and relationships from his real life. He needed to sever all his connections with others completely. Although Mike thought that doing this would allow him to escape, suddenly, several men appeared in the room. They started wreaking havoc, destroying everything in sight, causing Mike immense pain. Mike couldn't understand what was happening. There was no way out of the room, so how could these spirits have entered? It dawned on him that these were the spirits torturing him. As Mike screamed loudly, he once again saw visions of how he had entered the room and the troubles he had faced to get here. Over time, Mike became extremely weak, pleading desperately to be let out. He even started begging God for help. Suddenly, the entire place fell silent. In the next moment, Mike noticed a door behind him. When he opened it and looked inside, he heard the voices of people enduring hellish punishments. Mike realized that if he didn't do something, he might end up in the same situation, and he absolutely did not want to go to hell. Just then, Mike saw his daughter standing in front of him. He became incredibly emotional, as everything he was enduring was for the sake of seeing his daughter. His daughter immediately came to him, and Mike embraced her with great affection. He felt that perhaps his daughter had truly returned to reality, as he still hadn't fully realized that he was dead and was traveling through the stages from hell to heaven. Although Mike was overjoyed to see his daughter, she suddenly detached from her body and within moments, turned into ashes. Mike understood that this was an illusion, and he was getting trapped further and further. Infuriated, Mike started picking up various weapons and destroying everything around him. He smashed and broke everything in sight, but eventually, he became so exhausted that he lost consciousness. Mike noticed a timer on the side, which was about to run out. As the timer reached 0, another timer turned on. At that moment, the room had returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. Mike found himself in the same situation as when he had first entered the room. From the very beginning, Mike had made all his decisions in anger and without much thought. But this time, he approached things calmly and used his mind. Slowly, Mike began to understand that the room was trying to force him to commit suicide. There was even a noose present, which would have allowed Mike to end his life. He saw the bodies and spirits of others who had come to this room and had ended their lives in the same way, stuck forever. Mike was determined not to end up like them, trapped in hell. He realized that the room was just a part of hell, where souls were imprisoned. Mike decided against committing suicide and began to think about how he could escape and let others know he was trapped. He sat on a sofa, pulled out a bottle of drink, and instead of drinking, he used the bottle to start a fire. He set the entire room ablaze, hoping to attract attention from the outside. As the fire spread, Mike became injured but kept his resolve. Soon, the fire was noticed, and firefighters arrived to help him. Mike saw that both firefighters had 7 written on their helmets. From this, he deduced that he had reached level 7 and was very close to heaven. He realized he shouldn't give up now. First, he checked on the firefighters to ensure they were okay, and then, with their help, he managed to get outside. Mike was transferred to a hospital due to the critical condition he was in. There, his wife came to see him, and they spoke together in a much more amicable manner than before. After several months of rest, Mike and his wife worked hard together and earned a lot of money, allowing them to buy a large house. Mike had painted the entire house white, making it look like a paradise, as he wanted it to be a true heaven. While they were busy moving in their belongings, Mike kept thinking about the experiences he had gone through. His emotions seemed to be clouding his understanding, so he turned on a tape recorder. To his shock, the tape recorder played his daughter's voice, as if she was trying to communicate with him. Both Mike and his wife were astonished, and Mike realized that everything he had experienced was real. Determined to change his life, Mike stopped all his wrongful actions. He started living harmoniously with his wife and ceased writing those paranormal activity books, not wanting to deceive others any longer. He even donated all his father's property after his passing because he wanted to earn money through his own efforts, not by inheriting his father's possessions. After setting things right, Mike was not subjected to any further trials. He lived contentedly with his wife in their small paradise. He never expected to get another chance to correct his mistakes. Perhaps he was very lucky. And thus, our adventurous story comes to an end here.